Russia isn't just fighting a war, it's standing on a fault line. When the guns go quiet, the danger won't fade, it will grow. A weakened Kremlin, overstretched and boxed in by external pressure, faces rising unrest at home. This is no longer about tanks crossing borders. It's about whether the Russian state can hold itself together at all. And once that unraveling begins, no army on earth can stop it.
The military's primary goal is to be on the borders in the Russian sphere and prevent any sort of invasion. And in a post-Ukraine scenario where the Russians lost, their borders are very, very, very long. And so they really won't be available for any sort of domestic suppression of rebellion. That will fall to the intelligence services, which are just as strong now as they were 3 years ago. So you can have an open rebellion in places like Tatarstan and Bashkiristan, and the Russian government remains relatively capable of dealing with those. Now, they can't deal with it everywhere. As we saw in the Soviet system, when the internal services were much stronger than they are today, if you've got 24 places going into some degree of rebellion at the same time, then you're kind of screwed. But when those 24 places went into rebellion at the same time last time around, they were Kazakhs and Uzbek and Georgians and Latvians and Estonians and Armenians and Azerbaijani. None of them were ethnic Russians. And when the Soviet system fell, 14 of the 15 constituent republics of the Soviet Union were not majority Russian, and they are now independent states. What was left with rump Russia is much smaller, much more difficult to defend, but is actually more ethnically homogenous. So the Russian state, the Kremlin, would have a much better chance of suppressing internal dissent. Now, this is all pretty much a starvation diet, because a post-Ukraine Russia loses a lot of its income, its security situation is much worse, its financial position is considerably worse, and there would probably be pressure on it from the entire western and southwestern periphery, because once Ukraine wins, you're going to have any number of European countries that include but are not limited to Finland, the Baltics, Poland, and Romania, who are going to be pushing at the Russians to try to make sure they stay off balance. The Turks will probably get on that too.
What Zeihan is really warning about is systemic overload. After Ukraine, Moscow is losing money, leverage, and strategic breathing room, while its grip at home relies increasingly on surveillance and coercion rather than real strength. At the same time, pressure is mounting along nearly every western frontier as neighboring powers work to keep Russia permanently off balance. The result is not sudden collapse, but a slow, grinding test of whether the Kremlin can suppress multiple crises at once. History shows that this is where empires fail. Zeihan laid out the structural fractures, the endless borders, the internal strain, the exhaustion of power that no intelligence service can contain forever. But theory becomes reality on the battlefield. What follows is not an abstract forecast or a distant scenario. It is a single strike that crystallizes everything Zeihan warned about in one brutal moment. As the Kremlin struggles to hold its empire together, Ukraine has reached deep into the heart of Russian military power and destroyed something Moscow believed was untouchable. What we are witnessing is not just important news, it is historic. For the first time in modern warfare, Ukraine has destroyed a Russian submarine while it was fully submerged. Not docked, not surfaced, not exposed, hidden underwater, in what Russia believed was absolute safety. The target was a submarine concealed near Novorossiysk, the port city that had become the new nerve center of what remains of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. After Ukraine shattered Russian naval dominance in Crimea and forced the fleet to abandon Sevastopol, Moscow relocated its surviving assets deeper into Russian territory. Novorossiysk was supposed to be the safe haven, the last refuge beyond Ukraine's reach. That illusion is now gone. Ukrainian underwater drones located, tracked, and destroyed the submarine beneath the surface. This was no accident, no coincidence. It was a deliberate, technologically sophisticated operation that signals Ukraine's entry into an entirely new phase of naval warfare. The submarine itself was no ordinary asset. Classified by NATO as a Kilo-class vessel, it was designed to be stealthy, quiet, and exceptionally difficult to detect. These submarines are often described as black holes for their ability to absorb sound and evade sonar. Russia built much of its naval reputation on them, marketing them as silent, invisible predators. Yet Ukraine found it. More importantly, the submarine carried 4 cruise missile launchers, missiles repeatedly used to strike Ukrainian cities, homes, schools, and places where families sleep. This was not a defensive platform. It was an instrument of terror. By destroying it, Ukraine didn't just eliminate military hardware. It removed a direct threat to civilian lives. That alone makes the strike extraordinary. But the implications go further. Operating previously near Crimea, the submarine's mobility made it especially dangerous and hard to counter. After Russia lost much of its control of the Black Sea, the vessel retreated with the remnants of the fleet, slipping underwater near Novorossiysk, relying on distance, depth, and Russian territory for protection. That belief proved fatal. Ukraine deployed a new generation of underwater drones, an evolution of the maritime drones that have already devastated Russian surface ships. These subsurface systems represent a technological breakthrough. Ukraine didn't simply adapt Western tools. It built its own doctrine for 21st century warfare. The drones identified the submarine, closed in, and destroyed it underwater. No warning, no escape, no effective countermeasure. The cost of the Kremlin is staggering. Before sanctions, the submarine was valued at roughly $400 million. Today, under isolation and supply constraints, its effective replacement cost could approach $500 million. And unlike missiles or armored vehicles, submarines are not easily replaced. Sanctions have cut off critical components. Budgets are strained, and the state is already struggling to fund salaries, raise taxes without backlash, and compensate its own soldiers. This loss is not merely financial. It is structural. Russian naval power was already in decline. Now it is being dismantled piece by piece. The destruction of Black Sea Fleet headquarters, the loss of key vessels, and the forced retreat into Russian territory have all exposed the myth of Russian military invulnerability. This strike confirms it. Nowhere is safe anymore. And that realization arrives at the worst possible moment for Kremlin. Inside Russia, pressure is building. Protests are spreading. Taxi drivers are striking. Regions such as Bashkortostan and Tatarstan are showing signs of unrest. Ethnic and national movements are watching closely. Every military humiliation weakens the center and empowers the periphery. That is why this strike resonates far beyond the battlefield. It sends a message not just to Russian generals, but to every region within the Russian Federation that feels exploited or silenced. It shows that the state is weaker than it claims, that its defenses can be breached, and that its symbols of power can be destroyed even on its own territory. This is also why voices from national movements are growing louder. Groups representing nations within the Russian Federation are already discussing what comes next, not chaos, but structured, peaceful paths towards self-determination. They are preparing roadmaps because they recognize a fundamental truth. The current system is unsustainable. And while the submarine was being destroyed underwater, Ukrainian forces were striking on land as well. Another Russian military asset was eliminated using precision systems inside Belgorod, a region that has effectively become an active combat zone. More areas are slipping beyond the reach of Russian aviation and naval operations. The map is shrinking. The margin for error is gone. This is what it looks like when an empire enters its weakest phase. From the seafloor to the interior regions, Russian military power is being hollowed out, one strike at a time, one illusion shattered after another. The destruction of this submarine is not just a victory. It is proof that Russia can be defeated, proof that its most advanced weapons are vulnerable, proof that distance, depth, and propaganda no longer guarantee safety. And perhaps most importantly, it is proof that the future of warfare, innovative, asymmetric, relentless, now belongs to Ukraine.